at Village Hall. And so the first item on the agenda is membership update, and the update is we're looking at the membership plus Rachel Magatka. And I think we've all done some thinking about who, among our personal networks we might reach out to, and if we haven't caught the brass ring on that, I was thinking there's a lot of organizations in town. I reached out to Nature Conservancy, that has an office across from Murphy's, and I didn't get interest there, but there are a lot of organizations in town. If we can find someone from an organization in the village and have them maybe suggest a member who lives in the village, that might be a way to go. I'm thinking Mohawk Preserve, I'm thinking Open Space Institute, people who might want to assert themselves right now, because of, so haven't done that, but that was the idea, and I'll try and do some of that between now and next meeting.
In considering that, we would have to think about if there were any interests that are not akin to what we were doing. If they have a private interest or anything like that.
Yeah, that's why we had a member who was still waiting to hear from her employer at the EPA whether she's allowed to serve, and that hasn't been forthcoming.
To add to a list of organizations, I would just suggest the Climate Action Coalition. They might have someone in mind.
Yeah. I believe most of their members are townies.
I think a lot of them are, but they might know somebody who would like to join. Hey.
All right. Any additional items for the agenda?
I had something I want clarification on. Having to do with the planning board. And that's the agenda item. Our interaction with the planning board.
Okay.
I can go into details when it comes up.
We're expecting Jennifer Epstein from Riverkeeper, and I put that early in the meeting so that we wouldn't keep her waiting. But why don't we do that soon so that we can push that item down a little bit? All right, we'll put that after monthly documents.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the planning board. Monthly documents that I recall were the various emails we had back and forth on Riverkeeper signage. There was a memo I had sent to the village board, I think the day after our last meeting, which kind of summarized what we wanted to talk to them about tomorrow night. I don't know if there's anything else that has really come in. We have this from Jennifer Epstein and Riverkeeper, which we'll talk about later. It's her recommendation for signage to be posted at Village Hall.
That's the sign?
The idea being we have a very simple, short and to the point sign at boat launches, but this is her suggestion in terms of what would be posted here. I guess in a slightly larger sign, I don't know. But she sent this to me as her input, or the input from Riverkeeper. And it's comprehensive, and I guess the idea being if we have something really short at the boat launches and other places, they can refer to this for more information. Okay, planning board.
Okay. So I want to remind you that we're supposed to have somebody designated, or I don't know whether it's going to be one person or rotating, but someone who attends meetings of the planning board. However, now I'm getting all the email from the planning board, but I really don't know what to do with it. Am I supposed to sort through it? Is there something specific I'm looking for, or am I just going to, keep it?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, anybody, do you want to get planning board emails?
I guess that would kind of depend on if we're having one person go to the meetings, because if we're splitting that up, then I think it's kind of important that we get it. But if we're designating one person, then that one person could receive those emails and then relay to us what's relevant, what's important, what we need to know.
Wasn't that something we needed to discuss because of the way the law was written? It designated one person, and we were going to see if it was computer rotated.
Well, as I recall, and she's not here to defend herself, but Rachel volunteered to do that and said she'd attend planning board meetings where there was something on the agenda that could conceivably be relevant or of interest. I'm not sure if she's going to be here or not tonight, but that's probably the answer to that question, to identify whether she's going to be the liaison, and if so, maybe she should sit down with the chair, or there should be some sort of communication there to find out how you set up a system to know what is pertinent. Maybe it's be obvious from the agendas. But anyway, I think let's confer with Rachel and settle that for next meeting.
Yeah.
And in the meantime,
I think it's an issue to figure out what are issues that come before. Well, first of all, legally, what are the issues that come before the planning board that might involve an environmental commission that was a board, say, right? Because then there's a legal relationship. At this point, there isn't. But what are the issues to flag?
yeah, what is the process to filter with? And
Yeah.
And the other question is, would the village board be comfortable with us making that decision and saying we're going to decide which planning board meetings to go to, or what does the law say we should attend all planning board meetings? So I think first let's figure out who's going to do it, whether it's confirm it's Rachel, or and we're going to split it up, and then we'll figure that stuff out. In the meantime, I think we should probably all get them.
How you do it is up to you.
Okay. Well, don't want to assume and find out later. So appreciate the input.
And if that
So in
is
the meantime, I think we should all get the emails until next meeting, and we've settled that.
So there's a lot of emails. You do not want
Careful
all of
what
it.
you wish for.
You could have
Careful.
agendas and minutes. You could have it all, but I mean,
I don't want it all, huh?
I don't think you do.
Agendas and minutes?
So, because I can hardly sort through it.
She often sends agendas and minutes in one email.
Yes.
So it's not like you're inundated with multiple
Yeah.
each
I
one.
think that would be the
I think
one.
agendas and
Sounds good.
minutes, and then if there's an obvious.
Yeah, that gives rise to questions. We'll know what
Right,
questions
and
to ask.
then we can have the others
Okay.
scrutinize more closely.
Maybe we could work it into our agenda that we spend a certain amount of time just
Reviewing.
reviewing to see if there's anything there.
Okay. So
And
we'll
I-
add that to the agenda, the standing agenda.
And I think that once we have somebody going to those meetings, whether it's one person regularly or taking turns, we'll be able to better represent what's going on as opposed to just sort of assuming based on, what's in the minutes.
Yeah.
Better relay.
Okay. Thank you,
All right,
Andrea.
so I will send you all the agendas and minutes. What are
Send
we
them
waiting?
all.
Send them all for now. We
Minutes
can
and
always stop
agendas
them.
till the next meeting when
Okay.
we'll make some sort of a final decision. Let me find the memo that was sent to the village board, and I wanted to talk about. I'd asked to be on the agenda tomorrow night, and asked that whoever from this group can come.
Can I
And,
actually go back to agenda changes? Can we
No,
move this? Can we move this discussion to after the discussion about the plastic bag and the home energy
Sure,
audit?
sure.
That way we have a better idea of what we want to discuss with the village board, because
Sounds
we've
good.
already discussed other things.
Well, you know something? I think the large topic was planned at the discussion with the village board.
And then these were all
And these were all
subtopics?
subtopics, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's pass on the signage for Wallkill River. If Jen is able to be here, we'd like her input.
Yeah.
Solar streetlights. Now, we sent the village board a number of different companies that are suppliers. We suggested they contact 3 vendors. And contacting these real-life companies will allow us to get a handle on the real capital costs and compare them to the estimates in the research generated by the village. We need to learn from these companies what maintenance costs we anticipate, and see which ones of these or other vendors would be available to come to our village board and make a presentation to them and answer their questions specifically about new Paltz. And
You said you sent that to the village board?
what's that?
I was thinking, I don't remember
I don't
getting
know,
that.
getting that email. Did you send that to the village board?
Yeah. And you know something? Here's a copy. I think what happened was I asked that a hard copy be placed at the table of all trustees at last meeting, because this wasn't prepared till the afternoon of your meeting on the 26th.
Okay.
So if this is all news to you.
It's all individually or sent to Katie?
I think I gave it to Katie with a request for her to pass out hard copies.
Oh.
If you look at it, it's to and from, there's no email addresses there, so I think this was
Right.
this is done snail
Okay,
by
yeah.
hand delivery.
Okay.
So what I can do tonight is send copies out to the board and to Katie
Yeah,
by
that'd be
email.
great if you could send it.
Okay, all right. Action items. All right.
It's maybe for-
Well, and I kind of half expect that when we make these recommendations to the village board, they're going to put it back on us anyway. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that you didn't have it. So we're listing these companies, and if we can find out who can come and make a presentation to the village board, what they project as maintenance costs, what the capital costs will be, and if we can maybe come back to the village board with the results of that in a month.
Yeah.
That will,
I can jump in. I don't know if we want to look at solar street lighting as under the alternative energy concept, but, you know, since that's what I'm looking at, I'm happy to reach out to these.
that's great, that's great. And the only name I could find in my 30 seconds of looking for someone who is in charge of a solar street lighting program in a real place in America was this Kevin Bobkowitz in Downers Grove, Illinois. I call Municipal strangers all the time before I work, so I'll give them a call.
All right, so you're going to call Kevin?
Yeah. Municipal strangers. Okay.
Now, I just have a quick question. Who can I reach out to get the current cost of the lights that we are?
The,
Nancy.
$65,000 a year we spend on electricity. And that's
Just-
the-
But that,
just for street lighting.
oh, that's just for street lighting.
that's what we pay to Central Hudson?
Yeah,
For the
we
certain-
cut a $65,000 check. I mean, it varies with rates, obviously. 50 to 65, and we put it for 65.
So that would be the savings if we went to solar lighting.
Which is, if you put that into a loan calculator, it's the same annual payment as a $300,000 5-year serial bond. So if you can find a way to do this for $300,000 or less, we do it without costing the taxpayers. It's not.
It's a 5-year payback, and then that bill is gone.
Right.
Yeah.
I even thought that because we're only talking 300 and these things are simple, they're basically a big plan. And we draw up those right now and buy the parts and put them out together. You know, how many people would it take to lay out 300 of these things in Hazard Park on a Saturday afternoon and with 6 DPW guys looking over 6 crews of 2 or 3 people each, assemble these streetlights on our own like a community light raising.
That's what happened with Hasbro Park. You know? That was put together by citizens.
Big enough, yeah.
Yeah, it's only, I mean, I don't know what 310-foot streetlights look like, but they can't take up that much space on the park that big.
All right, so we need 300 streetlights?
Yeah, I mean, 300 streetlights. We have 277 now, but figured we could probably use a couple more here and there.
Well, that makes the math easy. That means $100,000, I'm sorry, $10,000 a piece.
1,000.
1,000. See, I said it makes the math easy.
Which makes it nice because if you go to the individual streetlights, you'll see they come in sometimes at $3,000 to $5,000 each.
Okay.
So,
So maybe if we get them in bulk like that, they would.
or we make them ourselves. And then the only cost is the design and then the shipping, or the parts.
And I'm sorry, I think you said this, but so maintenance, any other cost as far as like paying
Not to us.
electricity, or because it's solar we don't pay?
Oh, for the new ones?
Like once we've purchased the equipment, is there a
There's
regular
gotta be
annual
some
cost?
maintenance, but I don't know, no annual maintenance.
And what happens if it rains for 7 days and 7 nights?
Well, you rate them.
We
so
build
that-
an arc?
You rate them so that that's exactly what you do. You rate it for, I think, 10 days of overcast skies and the 10 darkest days of winter.
Okay, okay.
So something like that. So they're rated to be able to.
Manage that?
So all that is a function of how big a panel and how big a battery. And so you decide how big a panel and battery by things like that.
Okay.
And then in terms of installation, it would be its own post,
Yeah,
right?
unconnected
So we would
wires.
have, so it would not be, that's why we wouldn't have to worry about
It would be-
the grid, it would just self-sustain.
Pouring concrete footings, basically.
But exactly.
Excavating and pouring concrete footings work.
So I don't know what the cost involved in that is.
And that's something we
or if
could do
that's
in-
just rolled into.
Possibly do in-house with the DPW.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Replace 10, less than here and there. If we have 300 stockpiled, just they go out and install them as needed or as they have time.
Yeah.
Just try to find ways to do this cheap.
They need support footings because they need support,
Yeah,
because they're
you
heavy.
don't- not gonna-
Because I know what they look like, but I mean, they're heavy, but they're around the pole.
Yeah, but the pole has to rest on something. The pole is bolted to, is usually concrete.
Okay, I see.
And it's just be
Yes.
bolted, the base will be
Yeah.
bolted onto the concrete. So-
And what happens to our existing wooden poles?
The wooden poles have to stay because they carry the wires.
Yeah.
The lights would come down.
Central Hudson would take
Okay.
the lights back.
Gotcha, gotcha.
And when we asked them about installing new ones, I believe it was, the range was like $147 per light per year to like 160 something, depending on the wattage. But because we don't pay for the light itself, we just pay for the electricity cost in Central Hudson installing them. So just in terms of your numbers,
Okay.
it's about 150.
It's a pretty compelling case if the numbers work out, but
Absolutely.
let's see if they still do. Plastic bag ban, brought to us by John.
So I reached out to some people in the village as we suggested. I didn't get any response. Julie Robbins was one, several other businesses. So what I did instead of that was just compiled a justification for why we want to do it, made our case, found examples of the legislation that the board could use to model. And I believe I mentioned this before, but the 5 municipalities that did a plastic bag ban in New York all use the same language in the law, with the exception that some have different agencies that they put in charge of regulation, making sure that people follow it. But aside from that, the language is identical in all 5. So I have the different versions. I was going to present those to the board, the justification, and the recommendation that they move forward after a period of public comment. The way that the law works out, do you want to see it?
Sure, sure.
The way that it works out is that in the definitions, they distinguish different types of bags. And I'll just give everybody kind of a different one to look at. Jason, there, Ariana, if you want to look at one.
Yeah.
They're all the same, essentially. This is one from Connecticut, same language, but it carves out which agency is going to regulate. So if you look in the definitions, they distinguish checkout bags, which is what you're looking at, the point of sale. One-time single-use plastic bag is what you're looking to ban. So they distinguish that from a plastic produce bag, a recycled paper bag, a reusable bag. That definition section opens up the possibility of allowing for other exemptions should there be a viable public demand that there be other exemptions.
You mentioned cleaner bags were another one some places say.
There's industrial or home garbage use and industrial use bags. So they use the measurements of the bag is how they do it. So bags larger than your single-use carry-out bag are acceptable for home use and industrial use, and one of these laws should have that. It's under checkout bag. Does not include plastic produce bags measuring 28 by 36 or larger. So that's your home trash bag and your industrial bags. So that's kind of the beauty of, I think the beauty of the law is that you can sort of have some leeway with the definitions. All 5 of them use the law, so that would seem to suggest to me if there was a challenge to one, there would be a challenge to all, so it would make sense to use that same law. Near as I can tell, none of them have been challenged. I talked a little bit in the justification about some of the background. California's had extensive experience, Washington State, Washington, D.C., and sort of a little bit about their experience, why I think a ban is better than some of the other options, like a tax, or otherwise incentivizing recycling, which doesn't really work.
I think it's actually, I just forwarded it to 2 emails too. I had an intern that researched a lot of it.
Okay.
And the board actually voted in favor of moving forward with the ban on plastic bags, the village board. But this was the former board, not the current iteration of the board. And I had pushed back from the business owners, but I sent you some of the documents that my intern worked on. And I think one of the reasons why we weren't talking about tax is because there's some pre-existing laws in New York State that preempt us doing that. So
I think New York City had there was an issue in New York City that prevented them from doing something similar. So this is what they're using. It works. It's tested. They've had it. They haven't been challenged, near as I can tell. Tuckahoe tried to come to a vote on the exact same legislation, and their board voted it down. I'm not exactly sure why. I didn't go into too much detail on that, but that's kind of where I am with that.
Okay. You good?
Oh, the other caveat to the law would be that in all of the cases, there was a 6-month period between enacting the law and when it would be
Going into effect.
And I think in some places it might have even been a longer period, and I think one of them did 9 months. If there was some kind of public demand for a longer wait time, that could be
Right.
written in as well.
I actually spoke with Dan Torres about this earlier today. He called me for a completely other reason and then mentioned because he wanted it on our joint agenda for tomorrow night and doing it as a village and town since, you know, obviously there's stores in both places. You might already know all this information. But that he had the idea of having the recycling center. They used to have printed reusable bags, and I think they still have a couple that advertise the reuse center and recycling center, and thinking about putting some money in the budget for printing of those bags so that the businesses can't just say that we're hurting them if we're trying to help, you know, just create this reusable mentality.
This is one of the other arguments I made was that it could be an added revenue stream. We can give you a paper bag, or you can purchase this other bag, and it's free advertising if they chose to print up their own bags. Well, here's a mobile, reusable, free source of advertising. So I don't necessarily think the arguments for being harmful are that strong.
So
I think
you
there's-
when you guys gonna be ready to have a law to present to the board to ask us?
I've got the version, there's various versions here. The
But
one
is there
from
one that you like? Is there one in particular you could just hand us and say, here, pass this?
the language is identical in every iteration of the law in the 5 municipalities that enacted it, with the exception that some of them had conservancies or agencies that they wanted to give the authority to regulate it, to be in charge of seeing it through. Save that, the language it's identical. It's exactly the same.
Okay.
There's one floating around for Mamaroneck, and that's even got blank spots for where you would put, you know, where it is. So.
So if you could, if you guys are ready, just email that to the clerk and ask her to put it on the next agenda.
Okay.
Well, do I understand tomorrow night is a joint meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a regular village board meeting happening.
Because we were planning as a committee to, or commission had asked to be on the agenda for the village meeting so we could talk about some of this stuff for tomorrow night. If the village one doesn't kick in until late.
When did you ask? Because I don't remember getting the request. Maybe you got lost in the shuffle.
It was all part of this thing, and I'll have to go back to see. It may have been handled. Yeah.
Well, add you from the table. Add you.
Yeah.
Well, no, my concern is if you're going to have a long joint meeting.
It shouldn't be that long.
Okay. All right.
Well, and if we're talking about something like this, it's kind of relevant to both boards.
Gotcha.
Considering that Dan had requested this be on the agenda, and that it's actually not on the agenda, and you guys aren't on the agenda, but we can add all of it at the table.
Okay. All right.
Happily.
Thank you. So my only concern. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to ask what enforces it, or was there any history of it having been enforced?
In some cases, in the places where they had the Department of Conservation or some other agency, I think in both cases it was a conservation department, they were given the authority to do it. Otherwise, it's not delegated. Just in those instances, I think there were 2 instances. One being from a place in Connecticut. I don't know, they're floating out there. That's one of them.
So if you didn't delegate it, then who would it fall to, or who are you thinking of charging with doing that in the town/village?
Well,
Code enforcement.
I think that, yeah, I think
Building department?
if you have a large amount of compliance, it kind of becomes obvious. This store isn't doing it, and then, yeah, I'd imagine people come yell at them. Just citizens. Yeah. It's that kind of a town, you know.
That's true.
Otherwise, it just appears without that added part. So that right there is the same, with the exception of laws that do that.
So I think, Jason, we can be ready to talk about this to the joint boards tomorrow and probably get something after our next meeting in a month, get something formal to you. If not just that, I think it might be ready.
I could forward, like I said, one of them even has blank spots to put the code, so I can find wherever I found that online and forward that.
And the one concern I had talked about, because Dan Torres had raised it, is the equity issue. What about people who are, who don't have extra money to be buying reusable bags? And that's where the recycling center idea came around. But I don't know that they can generate enough bags to replace the number of plastic bags or number of real-life bags people would want. So there is still a, I guess if stores can still put out paper bags, that'd be okay. But I often see people walking from the supermarkets long ways down Main Street to the apartments with plastic bags because they're more sturdy.
Right.
So, I will talk to Kathy Cartagena at Family and see what she thinks about this issue and how it would affect people that she deals with and what suggestions they have. I think, the town or the village putting in some money for a supply of bags would be a good idea. But at some point, you can't make a million bags.
Right.
So at some point, people are going to run into this issue on a personal level. And
People have the
it's just,
expectation they can throw those out. It's no longer a reusable bag.
just keep that in mind as we move forward. It's
I think
not a
there are businesses that have been doing this already for, health and nutrition has this policy where they don't give out bags for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there are people in the community that already do this anyway, so hopefully it would spread quickly.
And not to steal Dan's thunder, but he mentioned that he had spoken to the corporate offices of the Shop and Stop and ShopRite companies.
Yeah.
And they were like, let's go, we've been trying to do this anyway. So,
Wait, really?
Yeah, those,
I know.
No, I thought it was the opposite.
One of them was very
He
rude
said
to
that the
him.
Chamber of Commerce was
well, we
on
spoke a
board.
month ago about this, maybe something's,
And
okay.
then- Okay, I don't know.
Well, let's let him tell
Yeah,
tomorrow night.
exactly,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
totally.
Somebody was very rude to him.
Oh,
But
okay,
the
all right.
Chamber of Commerce was on board with it, so maybe they would be willing to contribute some
Great.
funding to reusable bags also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were talking about the planning board a little earlier, Rachel, and wanted to get your input. We think that you had volunteered to attend the planning board for meetings that had items of pertinence
Yes.
to them. We were trying to figure out how one determines what's pertinent and what's not.
How about if it has to go through seeker?
Okay. Next. Okay. Now, well, Andrea, you want to talk about the emails? Because they generate a lot of emails, and we're figuring that we should all get them unless you were definitely going to do it, then you should get them. But the question is, do you want just agendas and minutes or everything?
I would like everything. I would like consultants' reports in particular, especially those having to do with water. That's okay. I mean, that's usually what's the most interesting thing to us.
I mean, I'm on the email list now, so I get whatever they get by email. So if you want, I'll send it all to you,
Okay.
and you can sift through it.
That's the best way to do it.
And then you can keep on top of what's going to be relevant for us to get, for you to get more involved in.
Maybe we just have Brogan add you to the email list and create less work on your
That
part.
would be easier.
I'm just
If
saying.
you want to arrange that, it took a little bit to get myself on
Oh,
that.
yeah? Okay.
Pull some
Maybe this guy right here will have some better luck than I
I
would.
think he pulled the strings for me.
Get just instead of having Andrew forward all the emails to Rachel, have Rachel just be on the email list so that
Yeah, Brogan.
creates less work
Do
for
that.
her.
No, she did put me on.
Okay.
Yeah,
So she just needs to add Rachel.
Yeah.
She'll do it if you ask.
Yeah.
Just email Brogan.
Yeah.
Okay. Municipal solid waste pickup. Thank you, Ariana, for your email. So we had talked about two different things. One being the switch over to municipal, a municipal system which would include adding municipal workers and buying the infrastructure, the trucks and the dumpsters and a cost outlay. We do think that's a compelling case to be made for that, and I think we should keep working on that. Looks like the village board is already looking at a one-year contract to one contractor and putting out a bid process. And if you have, 8 companies or 4 companies bidding for the work, that should bring the price down. It's not going to be the big nut of eliminating the profit, So I'd be curious to see where the cost per household would go from the current 400, under that sort of system. Maybe we could. The estimates now are $400 per household per year.
400 per year.
Yeah, per year, sorry.
So that's whatever it is, I'm not going to start math again, but that's whatever it
No,
is.
that comes out to like $30 a month.
I was going to say
average,
35, okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to say,
Got that mixed up.
so
I got it mixed up.
it's been asserted that going to municipal trash could bring that down to as little as $150 a month per household. And
More or less, depending.
so, uh,
150 per month, it would come down to?
A year,
No, for
you need
a
a
year.
A year. You meant a year. So we keep
Yeah.
mixing up a month and a year.
I know,
It's
it's
a
a
big
year.
difference.
it is. Yep.
It's a year.
Okay, so the point is,
Here, yes.
400 to 150 is, in equal units, is what is projected. And the question is, how close or far we would get with going with a bid process, and that's what we'll all find out when the bids are opened.
I actually sent you the RFP today, and I printed out a copy of it, and then I left it. I had every intention of bringing it for
Okay.
you, but because if you had comments on it, it's actually on our consent agenda for tomorrow, but I am going to remove it because I want further input on the RFP. So if all of you would be so kind as to take a look at it and give your thoughts and feedback, we can incorporate more if you see anything to be incorporated.
Okay. And we are suggesting to get data from Watervliet, Kingston, and other municipalities that have municipal trash pickup already, so that we can all kind of figure out what it looks like in the real world before we start going there. Home energy audits.
Okay, so I have been in touch with Michael Courtney with RUPCO regarding what we discussed regarding putting some sort of slip of paper or a card in with the regular monthly bills, just notifying people that this is a free service that's available and it could lower, the cost to you for your monthly bills. He is sort of recommending two possible options as far as what we could put in the bills. The first is a 3-fold pamphlet with all of the information, which I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I think it might be a little overwhelming to get such a full overview immediately without any idea of what you're getting into. Other idea is that they're always doing these events like the ones they're doing tonight, which is where they have people gathered and they give them all the information on how to apply and what the benefits are. So we could do a card saying, hey, there's this event coming up at X location. We could even do it at one of our meetings. We could have them come and speak and put in a card saying, come to the Environmental Policy Commission meeting on such and such a date. There will be a presentation from RUPCO on these free home energy audits. They could save you money. Or we could not take ourselves out of it, but just sort of make it there is this program through which you could have a free home energy audit and it could save you money on your, bills, and this is the website for more information. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on.
As I'm hearing you talk about it, I'm just thinking in terms of taking ourselves out of it. If it has the appearance of something that came from some private entity, it might scare people off.
Yeah.
Come look at our home energy.
Right, like
No.
what are they selling?
They'll-
It's in the fine print.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any way to reduce that appearance. Maybe having it come from a source that's
Yeah, absolutely.
private would be good.
I just wonder on how to reach out to people who wouldn't ordinarily see this information. I don't have great answers. The small thing that I was thinking of was reaching out to churches and temples and the religious community, see if they put something in their bulletin.
Yeah.
I mean, the New Paltz Times is great, but not everyone reads it, and so what other communities can we get to with this information that don't watch Channel 23 and may not, the church bulletin was the only thing I could think of, but I'm sure there are others, YMCA, what have you. So that's maybe a brainstorm thing we can look at for the future.
Well-
CSA email list.
Yeah.
I think there's 7 CSAs.
Okay, CSA community.
And I mean, if it's in the monthly village bill, then that's going to reach anyone who gets.
I only read one line of my village bill.
All right, so you wouldn't, so if there was something,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
it's good to know.
Yeah, yeah.
But if it's an additional slip of paper, you know.
With bright
then maybe
colors.
that would-
Oh,
And the
right.
word
yes.
free in large
okay.
letters.
You got me. You got me. You got. Sign me up.
That pulls me
Get
in.
some hot ink paper.
Interesting to see how many people attend tonight's event.
16.
Right.
16?
16,
Oh, that's
which
not
was
very
about
many.
10 more than Dan was expecting.
What's the event?
Michael Courtney is actually presenting at town, the community center,
yeah.
about the 10% challenge for home energy audits.
Yeah.
So,
I would have been there if I wasn't coming here.
And am I explaining this right, that the goal is to have 10% of the households in New Paltz know about this and have 10% of those people actually go through and have the audit?
and then I think it's like another 10% that have the audit go ahead and make changes to
Okay.
make their home more energy efficient.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah, I
All right,
got a
yes,
lot.
that's what it takes, just, one step at a
10%
time.
at a time.
So, do you guys want me to come up with a few drafts of what something in a newsletter that we could give to these community organizations?
And if you want to email it to us before the next meeting, we can
Yep.
either comment by email or hack it up,
Yep.
sorry, or review it at the next meeting.
I'll send out a couple, one for newsletters and one possibly for the monthly bill.
Great, okay, excellent, excellent.
Can I just ask, is that something that we could just print off easily, or is that something we would need to have like formally made and, with funds, or I don't know what anybody's thought is on that?
Probably depends on what we're looking at, in terms of how involved the printing is, and we're doing a copy of it.
Okay.
Um,
So I mean, if it was a simple, like quarter of a slip of paper that we could just run off?
We
Okay.
probably could.
One color paper, one color ink, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe like pink paper, that would stand out on your bill.
Anything else on that?
No, usually they're pink when you haven't paid them for a while.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Well,
right.
then
Yeah,
you'll be even more inclined to be
That's
like,
right.
what is this?
Reduce the fear level associated.
So the Millbrook Preserve,
No, I have an update on that, if you like.
sure.
I just got it. The Town Clean Water Open Space Committee, which was supposed to, this is a 10-year-old grant to develop a plan for the Millbrook Preserve. Actually, I'm trying to call it Millbrook Forest, because preserve sounds like something that Millbrook reference wrong. But anyway, so they hadn't done anything with this for about 5 years, and after repeated requests, it just wasn't happening. So actually, I went through and edited the report and proofread it, and went through all the comments that Michael Ziller and KT Tobin and some others had put, and the committee had put in, and included them where it was relevant. And there were a lot of comments about need for further research, but because we're so far behind, I just cut all that out of there. So I sent it, I was about to bring it to the village and town boards for approval when the committee kind of perked up, and now they're reviewing my review of it, and they're going to be submitting the final draft. I guess in the process of that, going through it themselves and submitting the final draft to the boards in July. At which point, assuming we just accept them as is and don't have a long drawn out process of going into the report, which could happen, I suppose, we will have that ends the grant, and we're not in jeopardy of losing any or having to give back any money. And we now have a management plan that we can begin to implement. So it's not really going to change significantly from what it is now, and I can email all of you copies of it. I have it on my computer if you want to read it. The current draft, the one with my edits in. But what that really is kind of grant fodder. Because once you have a plan, it's not much easier to get grant funding to do. It's easier to get grant funding to do the study. It's easy to get grant funding to some money for implementation, and the only thing that doesn't cover it is operations, which luckily we don't have to deal with for Rickkeeper and just like that too. So if we want to move the Millbrook Preserve forward, it's going to have to focus on two tracks. One is at mine and Ariana's level, where we're going to have to start having sit-downs with the landowners to get them to actually sign easements and legal rights of way. Because none of this is all conceptual. None of this is actually really, and everyone has agreed to it in concept, but no one's actually put pen to paper yet. So we're going to have to get a small negotiating team at the town and village board levels, mostly village because it's almost all in the village. But what would be very helpful is starting to look at what are the most critical parts of this plan to be implemented, because the major grant funding round for the year is over. It's called consolidated funding application. Cuomo piled all of these grants that used to have deadlines all over the place into one deadline.
And we now awarded right before election day.
Yeah, and it can be a pain because all of our grant writing energy has to go to the water and sewer, like the really critical stuff. But the stuff for parks is also in there, but we just don't have the resources to be doing that simultaneously. But there's still grants and rolling grant applications all through, kind of riddled through the state. So if kind of pushing us to get this thing done is one thing. But just starting to go through it and seeing where the implementation is, especially if you hike back there and know, this place is really damaged by whatever, and so we should prioritize this, or I don't know.
Richard goes there fairly regularly.
Well, I don't go there as much when it's hot out.
Is
but
that
I go there
you need to
often.
know?
That's good information.
There's something I thought about, and I'm sorry that there's something absolutely that's fundamentally wrong with the plan, and that is that it fails to take into account that the environment of the Millbrook Preserve is dynamic. In other words, it's not static because it's being architected by beavers, and as the beavers travel up and down the watershed in the Millbrook, they move the wetlands with them. And as they leave an area, it dries up. So the most critical, most important thing about the Millbrook is to keep the beavers happy, make sure that that they have food all up and down the wetland corridor that they've created. And if you go back there, you can see the history of them. You can see where they were years ago. You can see now where they're moving. Right now, they were living in one pond, and now their babies are moving to a different area. And the reason I think it's so critical to protect the beavers themselves is because in terms of what you can negotiate with the landowners, well, the last time the beavers were killed, it was one of the landowners who ordered them killed, and they actually weren't even on his property. They were on a different landowner's property. And the landowner, and the property on which they were killed in 2003, they're now starting to re-inhabit. And that property is owned by the town, but exists in the village. And so, but what that does is when the beavers move to an area, they spread the aquatic environment, they spread the areas where the fish and the birds can inhabit. And so when it comes down to what the purpose of a plan like this is for, is to protect that environment. And so I think that the plan needs to take into account the fact that it's dynamic and it's moving. And so it's difficult to say, you need to have a wider swath, I would say, of area that's protected, because even though it might be dry now, in a few years it might be wet depending on how the beavers move. So I just wanted to put that out there. Also, what that does, because the environment is somewhat dynamic, so must the paths be. So it's the paths actually get moved a lot, because as one path ends up getting flooded, then people start walking in a different area, and there are people who go back there and informally will cut. It's mostly
paths.
Yeah, it's mostly like multiflora rows that'll grow across and other things that'll grow, and people will actually come back in there and cut it back. And it's kind of like you don't necessarily. I mean, the only place where sort of permanent paths have been made is right by Woodland Pond, and they've taken it upon themselves to make paths there, and they have done that. There was, I'm sure you read about it, and some of them, they have some that are mulch paths that are very nice, and then they've got gravel, but that's just sort of the area that's right by the Woodland Pond project.
Well, And this is my first discussion of this with the committee. You happen to be here, but I'm not talking to you. So Rachel and I sat down and looked over this plan. I think number one, we want to recommend that something be done formally to formalize it, because a lot of people have sweat time and blood over this for years, you know, and then they got burnt out, and then another group of people sweat blood over this for years, and they got burnt out, and it still hasn't been passed. So that's kind of, you know, as volunteers, that should bother us that happens, and we need to stand up for our other volunteers. So we want something to be passed for sure. What I wanted to mention to the committee, once this thing is passed or before it's passed, there is there's an aspect of that I find disturbing. In the middle of the wetlands, amid all the maps of all the different habitats and different effects and different you know zones, there's a white area, and it's not rated as anything. It happens to be land that's owned by an individual or a developer. There's plans to develop that land, and as the report is drawn up, there's no impact. There's nothing there. It's clouds. It's the phantom zone, and I'm not comfortable with that. We haven't talked about that before, but as a committee, you know, as we talk about this at our next meeting or two, I'm going to advocate for a position on that, and I think you know what I just said what it's going to be. But I want to let you all know that when we look at that map, there's just a white area in the middle, and it's if that's the way people want to go, that's okay. But they need to do that knowingly and stand up and say they're doing it, because it's unusual.
Now, can I just ask, if development is going to be done there on this land that's owned privately, that would need to go through the planning board, right? And we would have a voice in that arena if we've got Rachel attending those meetings.
Well,
The areas that are in the village, yes, for the areas in the village. And
Do you
the
know
town
if
also
that area
votes
is in the village or the town?
The village.
yes, in the village, yeah.
Okay, so,
And we would have Rachel reporting to us, but she's not a member of the planning board and wouldn't be able to vote or.
but we would be able to give recommendations
Yes,
and give
yep.
Right.
information based on what we know of the Millbrook Preserve and the environmental
Right.
impact.
But what it's saying is the maps like this, habitat maps are supposed to show pre-existing conditions. They're not supposed to show areas that have been designated as desirable, and that's one of the words used in the report, desirable for development. So it's supposed to be neutral. It's supposed to say, okay, well, here are the steep slopes, you know, here's the beaver impoundment, not this area is more suitable, you know.
For development.
That's supposed to be decided at the planning board.
So does in that area that's privately owned, there's just no information in that area? You're saying it's just a white area with no
Yeah.
information about the habitats or the land, other than that it's desirable
Well, in
for...
some of the maps, yeah. And the word desirable is used in the report, yeah.
We'll make it a point to bring that map to the next meeting, because it's rough to have the conversation. I just wanted to bring up the concept and
Well, you want to look at the updated report also.
yeah. All right, so we'll try and get both the new version that Jason referred to
Just email it to me. Oh.
done. Okay, amazing.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Rachel, do you know of any preserves that are more dynamic, that are designated as preserves that people, you know, go to, where they do like recognize that, okay, this path has to be, you know, relocated?
No, it just occurred to me when I was walking back there, and I was walking on the paths that had been moved, and I thought, well, you know, if someone put this path on the map and said this is where the path goes, that's not, it wouldn't work, because
It changes.
because they get flooded. I mean, the areas that are wet change depending on where the beavers move, and you know, sometimes there are other changes. So,
I mean, in this climate, that's just going to be happening anywhere, right? Things that weren't wet are now going to be wet. So,
yeah.
you know, really looking into dynamic, you know, ways to deal with the dynamics of climate change in a preserve would be a good way.
Well, most of the paths are actually they're very nicely. People put rocks across the streams, and other people walk on the rocks. And they're it's just packed, it's just dirt from, people. I mean, the old ATV trails, some of the old ATV trails are wide enough that people can, ride their bikes on them. And they've been used so much that they don't really get overgrown. And then the paths are smaller, and then of course there's little deer paths if you're adventurous.
All right, so we'll talk about that some more next meeting. Natural gas at Village Hall. I guess we put that on just so we can all grumble a little bit. The portion of Henry W. Du Bois was closed for burying a pipe today, heading this way. And we can just see the progress of that very disturbing development as it moves its way across the village.
That's why they closed MW, huh? I don't know when, I know they're supposed to tear up the street right here at the end of next year, is it, for the sewage?
Sometime next summer.
Next summer. So were you planning to tear the street up twice, or were you going to wait?
I don't know. I'm not involved in that level of detail of planning.
Yeah, I think Central Hudson will do what they'll do, and I don't think
They
the
don't
coordinator
care
will
whether
do
we're
that.
tearing.
They're in different places. You don't put sewer lines next to gas mains.
They're all, you shut the street down to have it worked on.
I mean, the anti-fracking legislation that we put into place included pipelines. From what I was told, Central Hudson has right-of-ways that pre-exist our new laws. So I don't know if there's something we can do in that regard, and then I'm happy to ask the attorney about it.
I kind of fear what the answer is, but asking the question is a good idea.
Is there any way of finding out when Central Hudson plans to jackhammer the street here?
I mean, did you sign paperwork?
Blue signs off on that.
Blue signs?
It's a street opening permit. So it's a
So we don't actually know.
I don't know off the top of my head. We can find it tomorrow. It's losing up.
Right.
I'd like to have those dates.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
At the last meeting, we had talked about this, and basically the gist of the conversation was it's too late. But we had also agreed that we, as a board, I think we had agreed that we are taking the stance that we are opposed to it. Is there any, is that a statement that we're making tomorrow when we report to the board, or is that?
Well, I guess in the summary that the village board didn't get in all cases, the Environmental Policy Commission cites this decision as sending a message inconsistent with village environmental policies and principles.
Yeah.
That's our position.
I just think that as a board that reports to that board, I wouldn't want it to be because Jason and Ariana were here when we had the conversation. That doesn't constitute for me reporting to the board. I would want to be able to make that statement formally at the meeting. I mean, not me personally, but I think that we as a board need to make that statement as a report at the meeting, that we don't support it.
I think we will be able to do that. And the next item is researchers, which kind of, as we get into our issues, like plastic bags, find one. I think that's on us to find people to support us.
Do they have to be village residents in order to be?
That was not clear in the law.
We talked about making it not a condition.
It's not, I don't think it was in there for any of the commissioners, obviously, but for the researchers.
Yeah, I don't think it was easier for everyone. And I think that was the intent, was it didn't have to be.
Was that it was anyone willing to do the work, basically?
Yeah, the commissioners, the people voting on stuff like budgets, we want those residents.
Right.
But the people who just, I want to make the environment better.
Yeah, that's what my recollection as well.
I should find it fast.
No, it's right here. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It does say,
Two volunteers for one of those.
they're serving a term. I don't know if that matters, but it says that the researchers serve a year's term.
Well, you can appoint them to be a voting member if someone's absent, so.
Yeah.
May not vote for the commission. Oh, I see.
if duly appointed as such, the environmental policy.
Yeah, my feeling is if we had a researcher and they weren't a village resident, they couldn't be appointed
They
to
could
assess
service all
someone.
limits.
Yeah, but
So you're good, no,
But they could
so.
Yeah, I
still
don't
be a
wanna- I
research.
wanna widen the
As
pool.
far as I'm
you know.
concerned, that means that the researchers don't have to be village residents,
Right.
which is good, because if
Yeah.
it's
That opens up the pool.
Yeah, so,
so there's that one wrinkle that if someone did want to have an alternate on your thing for voting.
well, then that alternate would need to be a village resident. And,
Yeah, they would just have to be a village resident.
Yep, yep. Okay.
That's
Now,
convenient. I hope I did that on purpose.
just as we stated last meeting, we're going to ask that the law says that we produce our work product to the village board on June 1st. We're going to say we're talking to you in June and we'll report out to you on December. So give us 6 months and we'll give the work product. And I attended last week a community meeting at the community center. It was really geared toward Plains Roads residents with regard to the drilling for alternate water supply. So just a quick review. 90% of the discussion was on the well option, where they're trying to find a source of good well water that won't disrupt the existing water supply, and would provide enough water for the town and the village and for all our needs long term. That effort has produced some surprising results where some local residents have had their wells dry, they've had sulfur problems, and that was a surprise to some of the engineers. So they are saying they'll take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. They will mitigate. They'll put in, odor control devices. They'll put in whatever they need to put in to try to mitigate this. But the bottom line for some of these residents, they were saying, well, what is possibly going to happen, you're going to have to go to public water. So people who bought their houses with wells and kind of had their own private water for as long as they've been there, some of those folks are facing the prospect where you're going to have to go to public water and pay for your water because of this project. Frustrating to me is that I think lip service was given to the prospect of taking water from the Wallkill and cleaning that, which we know we can do. What the Board of Health has required is that there be monthly tests of the Wallkill water for a year. So they are doing that, and they've started that, and that process is ongoing. But what's not happening, to take water from the Wallkill would take a lot of engineering work. You need to pick a place to put the aqueduct, figure out a safe place to take the water, and where would it least disrupt people. And that's a lot of thinking and engineering and planning, and that's not happening. So they're telling the people on the Plains Road that there's two options, we're fully considering them both, but they're really only investigating one, the well option. And it is true that they're doing once a month testing for a year on the river water, but by not doing any of that research, they're pretty much closing that off as an option, because we do have a deadline, and they're going to turn the water off for the New York City aqueduct. So,
Well, they're not going to do that before we have a plan in place.
well, they have a date. They say that this is the date you need to be done by.
Right.
And I'll bring this up, with the village board. But it was my perception that Tom Rocco, who was presenting to the board, said bluntly that if all things being equal, we're going to go with the well option. It was stated that it's not an engineering issue. That's not why the well option is the preference. It was stated it's not a financial issue.
Perception.
Political, but trying to get detail on what the actual political issues were and what the thinking was. There wasn't a lot of success, and that effort will continue. So that's my report on that.
Did they report on how the well search for what possible, sources of well water, how it's going?
They do have potential sources. I think they dug 2 test wells, and to their surprise, when they did the first test wells, it caused some problems in the neighborhood. And that was a surprise to them. So they've identified 3 different types of wells that exist. They're not really mapped out. Some of them were dug 100 years ago, and there's not a lot of records. So they are looking to do some more testing and see which wells are affected, and by doing that, they'll know which wells are the old type, and it's kind of a trial and error kind of thing. But they do have some promising results. But when they started the work, they kind of had surprising consequences. So they are promising to mitigate, which means make whole, anybody whose water source is affected. You sent around meeting minutes earlier
Yeah,
today?
several times, and I corrected them again tonight.
Okay. I guess we would vote to accept the minutes, assuming that we have all seen them, and I didn't print out a copy because I printed out enough paper. Anybody have any additions or corrections or complaints? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, we're winding down here. Do we want to identify, we've got a list of issues we're taking on and we're going to talk to the village board about. We're not limited to that.
Good.
And I looked at, we haven't talked about signage yet. So before we close, we'll do that. But any meeting, in between any meeting, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to bring up issues that are of personal interest and put them in front of the committee and get researchers and help us move them forward. I think we're off to a pretty good start. So I'm not saying we should. We haven't been doing good work, but I just want to remind people that the slate's always open. And I think if we take this list from our agenda with the different items and bring them to the village board, we can just go down them item by item. I think that's pretty much a format we can work with. Now, that's all right. Let me pass out. These are Jennifer Epstein, the Riverkeeper.
I have this, so.
Okay. Sent this to me as her suggestion. We are looking at recommending signage at of two types in two locations in the village. I do have one more. Want to share? They would be smaller signs and simpler signs at the boat launches and at points where people interact with the river, fishing points. But Riverkeeper wanted to have a comprehensive sign, something that if people read a sign or had heard something that they could go to and learn the information. And this was the draft work product, which was sent to me, and it's pretty comprehensive and complete. And so I would like to, after people take a look at this a little bit.
This is just bacteria. They don't test for like agricultural chemicals or other toxins.
That's correct.
I met with someone from Riverkeeper just on Friday.
Yep.
So this is the
Fecal indicating bacteria. Poopies.
Yum.
So that being said, in addition to this, would we also want to post information about chemicals, or would this be sufficient? I mean, wherever this were being displayed, would we also want to present additional information?
I don't even know if we have additional information about chemicals. Like, I know that they're testing for this, but is there testing being done for other chemicals? I don't.
The DEC does, but not very often.
Okay.
That's because the DEC tests for different things than this, and that's what they base their rankings and how healthy the stream is.
Okay.
So right now, the Walker River is rated as C, which is the highest and best use is swimming and boating, according to the DEC. That's you're good to swim the Walker. But that's based on certain chemical testing and not on fecal coliform. So they're kind of like, if we had more DEC testing, it'd make a nice kind of dovetail.
So then at this point, the primary concern is fecal matter.
Yeah.
Well, there is other testing.
According to this.
The other stuff is bad too. I mean, there's been DDT plumes detected in new malls. All the phosphorus and nitrates from the fertilizers that wash off. I mean, one easy project might be to work with the county soil and water conservation district and get trees planted along the Walco. We need like a 500-foot buffer, is what we're told by ecologists. And even like along Walco farms, you'll see there's like one tree, two trees. At one point, there was a federal program where they would pay farmers to plant trees on the farmland. I don't know if that program is still there. But there are things we can do locally that would help with the Walco.
Well, and I don't think it's that fecal matter is the only thing of interest. It's Riverkeeper's giving us all this
That's what
information.
they've given
We
us.
have the data on fecal matter.
Right.
And the other stuff, it's a question of what do you test for, how do you test for it, and I think fecal matter is pretty basic. And I think if you
Not to knock the effectiveness of
Yes,
this
yeah.
information, because it's extensive, but
Well, and if you look at the 4 testing locations in New Paltz, you know why we're having this conversation. And I think once we know something, if we don't take action, bad on us, and we're starting to know something. So I think the signage is a way to let the general population, the people who use the river, know, and it's a way to force them to know, because they can't put their kayak or their boat in the river without seeing the sign. And, you know, if they choose not to join this action, if they choose not to cure this river, that's on them, but we're doing our part. And I'm sure there'll be more after this, but this is a start.
I think that this is fine for here,
Yeah.
but like we said in the email, I just think that as little jargon as possible in a sign by the boat launch, because I think that we really want that to be readable to anybody from, you know, like even children whose parents are up at, you know, Water Street and they go down, or, you know, just, I think anybody should be able to read a sign that's down by the water and know that there is risk to entering that water.
And here are all the various suggestions that came through in the email chain, which looked like it was going to get really long, so I don't know. Is that, this should be 2 pages?
yep,
Okay.
yes.
Yep, good. Andrea?
Is there a nice way of saying fecal contaminant? Because I think that's very clear, like as to what is in the water and why you shouldn't go in it. And there's evidence that that is what, and that's what they're testing for. They've tested for fecal contaminants, so if this sign were to somehow indicate that in a polite way.
Contaminant's a pretty big word.
The toilet, the water level rises.
Well, you can't say any, you don't want to say poop, and you can't say shit.
Fecal matter.
Yeah.
Fecal matter.
People figure that out.
So what if we combined Rachel's 2 suggestions of this water has tested positive for fecal matter and has not been determined to be safe for human contact?
Bing.
Sounds perfect.
Sold.
Okay.
And someone might want to talk to Blue, we have a sign making machine, I don't know if we can make that one in particular.
You
Okay.
don't have
You might
the
be able
fecal
to do
matter
that.
template?
Yeah,
Can you
I don't
say
think they
that?
came with a clip art for the
Can you
machine.
say that?
Yes.
This water.
Oh, you can have.
This water has tested positive for fecal matter and has not been determined to be safe for human contact.
Do you think we should have it in Spanish too, or?
Yeah, if you can translate.
I don't think dogs should go in it either, if you ask me.
We can get a barking
Dogs don't
Yeah, you
care.
can, what are you, a professional or something?
Okay,
Dogs enjoy
off the
it.
record,
Yes.
so my dog
You're on
came,
TV again here.
my dog came home with her nose completely all broken out. Like, dogs don't get poison ivy, but that's what it looked like. Really bad, bleeding, bumpy, gross. So I cultured it. I put her on antibiotics, but I cultured it. And one of the bacteria was typical staph pseudointermedius, which all dogs have on their skin, and you know probably was the main culprit. But the other one was some sort of fecal matter, some enterococcus that comes from fecal matter. I blame it on her swimming.
In the walkout?
Well, in the oxbow, but we're.
Yes.
Well, my dog will actually make contact with fecal matter. It's like, hey,
And don't they all sniff each other's butt? I mean, come on now.
exactly. I don't know if you put a sign up in the dog.
I'm just kidding. You don't have to add dogs. But I don't think it's good.
Okay, so there will be a joint meeting tomorrow. Joint meeting start at 7 or 7:30? All right. And, okay. So I figure we'll get to the village board court around 8:30? Or is it really short? Do you have any? Just trying to figure.
It's probably good.
Tell people to arrive. Okay. All right. So whoever can make it tomorrow. Rachel, have you been appointed yet?
BCs is the more succinct way to say, huh?
Um,
I don't know.
Well, why don't you come tomorrow and get your ass appointed?
Next meeting is
Fourth Tuesday,
What about all this paper?
the 20th.
I'll bring it home and reuse it.
Did I do that right?
Actually, I
We
think
talked
it might
about that before you got here.
I think it's, July has 5 weeks, so it's going to be
And that has the data.
the 22nd.
Yep. Let me add that now.
Do you want this back?
All right, next meeting is July 22nd.
Okay. All right, so takeaways,
And the next time you guys see me, I will be a Torres.
how nice. Muzzle top in advance. Or sympathies. That's great. When? What's the date?
4th of July.
Nice.
It's coming up.
That's so soon.
It's so 10
Yeah, we're done. We're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got no gavel. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was like, I almost
No worries.
Where are you?
It's that time of year.
At Anthony's Pier 9?